Three gunshots shattered the morning calm at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Blood pooled beneath Judge Maya Washington as stunned travelers screamed and scattered. But she didn't fall. Rising slowly, crimson staining her white blouse, she locked eyes with the officer who'd just shot her and spoke words that would ignite a revolution. "You just shot a federal judge." What happens next will shake the foundations of American justice. Stay with me until the end of this incredible true story, and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story of courage travels. The September sun hadn't fully risen over Charlotte Douglas International Airport when Maya Washington arrived at Terminal C. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that came from 15 years on the federal bench. Though this morning, dressed in casual travel clothes, dark jeans, a white blouse, and comfortable flats. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was one of the youngest federal judges in the Fourth Circuit. She'd deliberately chosen to travel incognito. No judicial security detail, no special privileges, no VIP treatment. Just Maya Washington, private citizen, heading to Atlanta for her niece's wedding. It was supposed to be a joyful weekend, a brief respite from the weight of the gavel and the endless stream of cases that crossed her desk. The TSA checkpoint loomed ahead, its blue-uniformed agents already looking weary despite the early hour. Maya had noticed over the years how these checkpoints had evolved from security measures into something else entirely. Theaters of power, where ordinary citizens were made to feel like potential criminals, where dignity was surrendered along with shoes and belts. Next, the bark came from Officer Kevin Bradley, a thick-necked man in his late 30s whose TSA uniform stretched tight across his chest. His pale blue eyes swept over the growing line with the kind of casual disdain that suggested he'd long ago stopped seeing travelers as people. Maya stepped forward, placing her carry-on on the conveyor belt. She'd traveled enough to know the routine laptop out, shoes off, pockets empty. She moved with practiced efficiency, but something about her calm demeanor seemed to irritate Bradley. "Ma'am, you need to remove your watch," he said, though she'd already placed it in the bin. "It's already there," Maya replied evenly, pointing to the gray plastic container. Bradley's jaw tightened. He didn't like being corrected, especially not by a black woman who didn't lower her eyes when she spoke to him. In his 5 years at TSA, he'd grown accustomed to a certain deference, a certain fear that he'd come to expect no demand from travelers, particularly those who looked like her. "Step through," he ordered, his tone sharper now. Maya walked through the metal detector. It remained silent. "Step aside for additional screening," Bradley announced immediately. The machine didn't beep. Maya observed her voice still calm, but now carrying a slight edge. "Random selection," Bradley said, though nothing about his expression suggested randomness. "Step over here." Maya had been through this dance before. The random selections that somehow always seemed to find her, the extra scrutiny that came with her skin color, the small humiliations designed to remind her of her place. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in Bradley's posture, a barely contained aggression that set off alarm bells in her mind. "Female assist," Bradley called out, but when no female agent immediately appeared, he stepped forward himself. "Arms out." "I'll wait for a female agent," Maya said firmly. "Arms out, or you're not flying today," Bradley snapped. The conversation was drawing attention now. Jordan Williams, a young TSA agent barely 6 months into the job, watched from his position at the next lane. At 24, Jordan still believed in the mission, keeping people safe, serving his country. But more and more he'd been troubled by what he witnessed, particularly from Bradley. The way certain travelers were singled out, the unnecessary aggression, the small cruelties that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with power. Jordan had started documenting incidents using his phone when he could, writing detailed reports that his supervisors seemed to file directly into the trash. But he kept recording anyway, driven by a sense that someday someone would care about the truth. "Is there a problem here?" A woman's voice cut through the tension. Supervisor Patricia Hendricks approached her graying hair, pulled back in a severe bun that matched her expression. Passengers refusing screening. Bradley reported his version of events already twisted. I asked to wait for a female agent, Maya clarified. That's within my rights. Hendricks looked Maya up and down, taking in her composed demeanor, her educated speech, the way she stood straight despite the growing crowd of onlookers. These were the troublesome ones. Hendricks thought, the ones who knew their rights, who wouldn't just comply. Officer Bradley can conduct the screening, Hendricks said, or you can forfeit your flight. Maya felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same feeling she experienced when reading case files of citizens whose rights had been trampled by those in authority. But she was also keenly aware of the delicate situation. She had a plane to catch, a wedding to attend. Sometimes survival meant choosing your battles. Fine, she said, extending her arms. Bradley stepped forward, his wand in hand, but he wasn't interested in a standard screening. His movements were aggressive, invasive, designed to humiliate rather than secure. When the wand passed over her waist, he paused. What's this? He demanded, though the wand hadn't alerted. My belt, Maya replied. Remove it. The metal detector didn't. Remove it now, or you're done here. The crowd was growing larger. Phones were coming out, though Bradley hadn't noticed yet, too focused on his power play. Jordan Williams had his phone recording from his position, angling it to capture the entire interaction. Maya slowly removed her belt, her movements deliberate and dignified. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But Bradley wasn't satisfied. He wanted fear. He wanted submission. And her calm defiance enraged him. Bag check, he announced, grabbing her carry-on from the belt. That's already been through the X-ray, Maya pointed out. I said bag check. Bradley repeated, dumping the contents onto the metal table with unnecessary force. Her legal briefs scattered, her personal items exposed for all to see. A small framed photo of her late mother fell to the floor, the glass cracking. Maya bent to pick it up, and that's when Bradley saw his opportunity. As she straightened, he grabbed her wrist. Assault on a federal officer, he shouted, though she'd done nothing but retrieve her property. What assault? Maya demanded, trying to pull her arm free. I'm picking up my... Stop resisting. Bradley yelled, his free hand moving to his hip where his service weapon rested. The crowd gasped collectively. Several people shouted for him to calm down. Jordan Williams stepped out from his position, his phone still recording his conscience, overriding his training to not interfere. Officer Bradley, Jordan called out. She's not resisting. I saw the whole thing. Bradley's head snapped toward Jordan, his face flushing red. Get back to your post, Williams, or you'll be written up. Let her go, Jordan said, standing his ground. This is excessive. Maya felt Bradley's grip tighten painfully on her wrist. She could see the scenario spiraling, could feel the danger escalating. Her judicial training kicked in, de-escalate, document, survive. Officer, she said calmly, I'm Judge Maya Washington of the Federal District Court. Please release my arm and we can resolve this professionally. The words should have been magic, should have stopped everything cold. In any rational world, Bradley would have immediately released her, apologized, perhaps even felt a spike of fear at having manhandled a federal judge. But Bradley was beyond rational. The revelation of her identity didn't calm him, it enraged him. How dare she pull rank? How dare she think her position made her better than him? In his mind, she was everything wrong with the system, a black woman in a position of power looking down on hard-working men like him. Sure you are, he sneered. And I'm the President of the United States. I have my credentials in my bag, Maya said steadily. Just let me show you. But Bradley wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, she was lying, resisting, threatening his authority in front of everyone. His hand moved to his weapon. Gun? Someone in the crowd screamed, though Maya had no weapon. The next seconds unfolded in horrible slow motion. Bradley drew his service weapon, a Glock 19 that TSA officers had been authorized to carry since 2018. Maya instinctively raised her free hand, the universal gesture of surrender of peace. "Don't," she began. The first shot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the security checkpoint. The bullet caught Maya in the left shoulder, spinning her partially around. The crowd screamed, scattered dove for cover, but Bradley wasn't done. As Maya stumbled, still standing, still conscious, he fired again. The second bullet grazed her ribs. The third struck her in the thigh. Maya fell to her knees, blood spreading across the white tiles like spilled wine. But even as her body failed her mind remained sharp. She pressed her hand to her shoulder wound, looked up at Bradley, who still had his weapon trained on her, and spoke with remarkable clarity. "You just shot an unarmed federal judge. In front of 50 witnesses. Your career is over, but more importantly, you've just committed attempted murder." The words cut through the chaos like a blade. Bradley's weapon wavered. Around him, dozens of phones captured every second. Jordan Williams had moved closer, his recording catching Bradley's expression as it shifted from rage to the first creeping fingers of realization. She was resisting," Bradley stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "I have it all on video," Jordan announced loudly. "Every second. She never resisted. She never threatened you. You just shot an unarmed woman who identified herself as a federal judge." Supervisor Hendricks stood frozen, her face pale as death. This wasn't a situation she could spin, couldn't bury in paperwork. The blood on the floor was real. The cameras were everywhere. And if this woman really was a federal judge... "Call 911. Someone shouted, though several people were already on their phones. Maya remained conscious through sheer force of will. The pain was extraordinary, radiating from 3 points of fire in her body, but she'd presided over enough cases to know that staying conscious, staying vocal, was crucial. The moment she passed out, the narrative could shift. Bradley could claim anything. "My name is Judge Maya Washington," she said loudly, her voice carrying despite the pain. "I serve on the Federal District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. My badge number is 4471. I was shot 3 times by Officer Kevin Bradley. Badge number..." She squinted at his name tag, B2847, without provocation after identifying myself. "I need everyone recording to preserve that footage. It's evidence in what will be a federal investigation." Her words, calm and procedural, despite the blood pooling beneath her, had a profound effect. The crowd, initially scattered in panic, began to coalesce. People who'd been running stopped, turned back, raised their phones higher. This wasn't just a shooting anymore, it was a judge maintaining court, even while bleeding on the airport floor. "Shut those phones off." Hendricks finally found her voice moving toward the crowd. "This is a security incident, no recording. You have no authority to demand that." Maya said, her legal mind still sharp. "This is a public space. They have every right to record, especially when witnessing a crime." Bradley had holstered his weapon, but hadn't moved to help Maya. He stood there frozen as the magnitude of his actions began to sink in. Around him, other TSA agents were arriving, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers, airport security. The scene was becoming a circus, but through it all, Jordan Williams kept recording, kept his phone steady on Bradley's face. The EMTs arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours to Maya. As they worked to stabilize her, she kept talking, kept establishing the narrative. "Officer Bradley fired 3 shots, shoulder, ribs, thigh. I was unarmed. I had cleared the metal detector. I had identified myself as a federal judge. Is Jordan Williams still here?" "I'm here, Judge," Jordan said, stepping forward. "You have video. Everything, Your Honor, from the beginning." "Good," Maya said, as the EMTs lifted her onto a stretcher. "Don't let anyone take your phone. That's evidence." As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Maya heard Bradley finally speak, his voice desperate. "She was reaching for something. I thought she had a weapon." "What weapon?" Jordan challenged him. "Where is it? Show us all this weapon." The crowd began to murmur, their phones still recording, as Bradley looked around frantically, as if a weapon might materialize to save him. But there was only Maya's scattered belongings, her broken mother's photo, her legal briefs spread across the floor like accusatory fingers. The ambulance doors closed on a scene of complete chaos. But Maya had accomplished what she needed. She'd stayed conscious, established the facts, ensured there were witnesses and recordings. Now came the hard part, surviving, recovering, and then doing what she did best, pursuing justice. The ride to Carolina's medical center was a blur of pain and medical jargon. The EMTs worked efficiently establishing IVs, controlling bleeding, monitoring vitals. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, held Maya's hand. "You're going to be okay, Judge," Sarah said. "You're strong." "I have to be," Maya managed. "This isn't just about me anymore." And it wasn't. Already the videos were spreading across social media like wildfire. Judge Maya began trending within minutes. News vans were racing toward both the airport and the hospital. The story was evolving from a shooting to something larger, a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority, with systemic bias, with the small tyrannies that had become normalized in American life. At the hospital, as Maya was rushed into surgery, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department was in crisis mode. Chief Robert Danvers stood in his office watching the videos on multiple screens, his face growing paler with each viewing. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "He shot a federal judge. He shot a federal judge in broad daylight on camera for no goddamn reason." His deputy, Marcus Thompson, one of the few black officers in leadership, stood silent for a moment before speaking. "Chief, with all due respect, he shot a black woman. The fact that she's a judge just means it'll actually matter this time." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. How many other Maya Washingtons had there been? How many who weren't judges, who didn't have the presence of mind to announce their credentials? Who didn't have Jordan Williams there to record everything? How many whose stories were buried in bureaucracy and silence? Back at the airport, the crime scene was being processed, but the real action was happening in the terminal's administrative offices. Supervisor Patricia Hendricks was in full damage control mode, pulling agents aside trying to coordinate stories. "We need to be unified on this," she said to a group of TSA officers. Bradley felt threatened. The passenger was non-compliant. "We followed protocol." "What protocol involves shooting an unarmed woman?" Jordan Williams stood in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. "Williams, you're already on thin ice for abandoning your post," Hendricks threatened. "I'm on thin ice." Jordan laughed bitterly. "Ma'am, we just witnessed attempted murder. You think covering for Bradley is going to save any of us? I have video of the entire thing. So do 50 other people. The truth is already out there." "You're terminated," Hendricks snapped. "Turn in your badge." Jordan unpinned his badge slowly, deliberately. "Gladly. I joined TSA to protect people, not to watch them get shot for existing while black. And ma'am, you might want to lawyer up. Because when Judge Washington recovers, and she will recover, she's going to come for all of you. And I'll be first in line to testify." He placed his badge on the desk and walked out head high. In the hallway, several other TSA agents stopped him, patted his shoulder, whispered support. Not everyone was like Bradley and Hendricks. Many were horrified by what they'd witnessed, troubled by what their agency had become. As Jordan exited the airport, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Williams, this is David Chen from CNN. We've seen your video. Would you be willing to speak with us about what happened?" Jordan paused at his car, looking back at the airport where he'd just lost his job for doing the right thing. "Yes," he said firmly. "Yes, I would." The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. By noon, the story led every major news network. The videos, Jordan's especially, but also the dozens of others from different angles, played on repeat. Each viewing revealed new details. Bradley's aggressive stance, Maya's calm demeanor, the way she'd raised her hand in surrender before he fired. At Carolina's medical center, Maya emerged from surgery in critical but stable condition. The bullets had been removed, the damage repaired as much as possible. She would survive, though the road to recovery would be long and painful. When she woke, the first face she saw was her sister Angela, who'd driven from Atlanta in a panic. "Maya," Angela sobbed, gripping her hand. "Oh God, Maya, I thought we'd lost you." "Not yet," Maya whispered, her throat dry. "Not when there's work to do." "Work, Maya? You were just shot 3 times. You need to rest to heal." "I need my phone," Maya interrupted. "And I need David." David Reeves was more than Maya's colleague. He was her former law school classmate, her closest friend on the bench, and one of the finest legal minds she knew. When he arrived an hour later, his usually composed face was tight with barely controlled fury. "Maya," he said softly, taking her other hand. "What do you need?" "I need you to file federal charges," she said. "Attempted murder of a federal official, civil rights violations, conspiracy if Hendricks tries to cover it up, and David. I want you to look into Bradley's history. This wasn't his first time. Men like him always have a pattern." David nodded, taking notes on his tablet. "The Attorney General's office has already called. They want to handle this personally." "No," Maya said firmly. "They'll want to contain it, minimize it. One bad apple and all that. This is bigger than Bradley. This is about a system that gave him a gun and a badge and told him he could act with impunity. I want a full investigation. Every complaint against him, every incident Hendricks covered up, every time someone like Jordan Williams tried to report something and was ignored." "That's going to be war, Maya. The unions, the TSA administration, Homeland Security, they'll all push back." Maya managed a grim smile. "Good. I've been a judge for 15 years, David. I've been careful, measured, balanced. But they shot me for the crime of not being sufficiently submissive. The time for careful is over." As David left to begin building the case, Angela helped Maya sit up slightly. The news was playing on the room's television, and Maya watched herself get shot over and over again, each replay making Angela flinch. "Turn it up," Maya said when Jordan Williams appeared on screen, being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. "I couldn't just stand there," Jordan was saying. "I'd watched Officer Bradley escalate situations before, particularly with passengers of color. I'd filed reports. Nothing ever happened. But when he drew his weapon on an unarmed woman who'd identified herself as a federal judge, I knew if I didn't record it, if I didn't speak up, it would be covered up like everything else." "You lost your job for this," Cooper noted. Jordan nodded. "And I'd do it again. Because what's a job compared to someone's life? What's a job compared to the truth?" Maya felt tears prick her eyes. This young man had sacrificed his livelihood for a stranger for justice. She made a mental note to ensure he was taken care of, that his courage was rewarded, not punished. The hospital room gradually filled with flowers, cards, and visitors. Fellow judges, civil rights attorneys, even several senators made appearances. The shooting had touched a nerve, become a flashpoint for discussions about authority, accountability, and systemic racism. But the visitor who surprised Maya most arrived on her second day of recovery. It was a middle-aged white woman, nervous, clutching a worn purse. "Judge Washington, I'm Carol Summers. You don't know me, but Officer Bradley did something similar to my daughter 2 years ago." Maya's attention sharpened despite the pain medication. "Similar how?" "He didn't shoot her, but he traumatized her. She was 17, flying alone for the first time to visit colleges. He singled her out, made her strip down to her underwear for a search, even though she'd cleared everything. He made comments about her body, threatened her when she tried to report it. We filed a complaint, but nothing happened. They said it was a he said, she said situation, even though there were cameras everywhere." "Do you still have documentation of your complaint?" Maya asked. Carol nodded, pulling out a folder. "Everything. The complaint, the response saying the investigation found no wrongdoing. Even the therapy bills from what it did to my daughter. She's afraid to fly now. Dropped out of college because she couldn't travel to campus." Maya took the folder with her good hand, scanning through it. The bureaucratic language couldn't hide the horror of what had happened. the casual cruelty that had been dismissed as proper procedure. "Mrs. Summers," Maya said carefully, "would you and your daughter be willing to testify to share your story publicly?" Carol's eyes filled with tears. "She's terrified. But when we saw what he did to you, when we saw you stand up even while bleeding, she said maybe it's time to be brave too." After Carol left, Maya called David back. "It's not just me. There are others. We need to find them all." What followed was an extraordinary grassroots investigation. The hashtag #BradleyVictims began trending as people shared their stories. Not just about Bradley, but about similar experiences with other TSA officers who'd abused their authority. Jordan Williams, now unemployed, but with multiple job offers from civil rights organizations, became an unofficial coordinator, verifying stories connecting victims with attorneys. The evidence was overwhelming. In Bradley's 5 years with the TSA, there had been 43 complaints against him. 43. Everything from unnecessary aggression to sexual harassment to racial profiling. Each one dismissed buried, or resulted in nothing more than a verbal warning. Supervisor Hendricks had personally signed off on 38 of those dismissals. The TSA tried to control the narrative, releasing a statement about their commitment to passenger safety and respect, announcing Bradley's suspension pending investigation. But it was too late. The dam had broken. 3 days after the shooting, while Maya was still in the hospital, the first lawsuit was filed. Then another. Then dozens. By the end of the week, the TSA was facing a class action suit representing over 200 victims of abuse by various officers. Bradley was arrested on federal charges, his bail set at $2 million. The video of his arrest, him being led away in handcuffs from his suburban home while his neighbors watched, became almost as viral as the shooting itself. But Maya wasn't satisfied with just Bradley facing consequences. From her hospital bed, she was building a larger case, a systemic challenge to the entire culture that had enabled him. "This isn't about one bad officer," she told a gathering of attorneys in her hospital room, which had become an impromptu war room. "This is about a system that attracts bullies, arms them, and protects them from consequences. Bradley is a symptom. We're going after the disease." The Attorney General, Loretta Harrison, finally came to visit personally. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for both brilliance and political caution. "Judge Washington," she began formally, "I want to assure you that the Department of Justice takes this matter very seriously." "With all due respect, General Harrison," Maya interrupted, "I've heard that before. Every victim of police brutality, every target of systemic discrimination has heard that before. Usually right before their case gets plea bargained down to nothing and everyone moves on until the next shooting." Harrison's jaw tightened. "What exactly are you proposing? A complete federal investigation into the TSA? Not just Bradley, not just Charlotte. Every complaint that was dismissed without proper investigation. Every supervisor who covered up abuse. Every policy that enables officers to act without accountability. And I want it public. No closed-door settlements, no sealed records. The American people deserve to know what's been happening at their airports." That would be unprecedented. The security implications alone. The security implications of having armed bullies traumatizing innocent travelers, Maya shot back. Or the security implications of the public losing all faith in federal law enforcement, because that's where we're headed if this gets brushed under the rug like all the others. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You know you're asking me to take on one of the most powerful unions in federal government, to challenge policies that have been in place since 9/11, to essentially admit that we've been failing the American people for 20 years. "Yes," Maya said simply. "I am." "And if I say no?" Maya smiled, the expression sharp despite her pain. "Then I'll do it myself. I'll recover. I'll return to the bench, and I'll use every judicial power at my disposal to force transparency. And General Harrison, I'll have the American people behind me. Because everyone who's ever been humiliated at a checkpoint, Everyone who's ever been singled out for the color of their skin or the way they look. Everyone who's ever felt that creeping authoritarianism that's infected our security apparatus. They're all watching. They're all waiting to see if justice means anything anymore. Harrison stood to leave, then paused at the door. You know, Judge Washington, I became Attorney General because I believed in reforming the system from within. But sometimes... She trailed off, then looked back. Sometimes it takes getting shot to realize the system doesn't want reform. It wants submission. So what will it be? Maya asked. Harrison straightened her shoulders. War it is then. I'll announce the investigation tomorrow. The announcement sent shockwaves through Washington. A comprehensive federal investigation into the TSA was unprecedented. The Union immediately pushed back, claiming it would compromise national security, demoralize officers, and lead to chaos at airports. But public opinion had shifted decisively. The videos of Maya's shooting played endlessly, each viewing reinforcing the narrative of abuse of power. Jordan Williams became a folk hero, appearing on every major news network, his calm demeanor and clear moral stance resonating with viewers. I'm not a hero, he said on 60 Minutes. I just did what anyone should do when they witness injustice. The real hero is Judge Washington, who maintained her dignity and fought for justice even while bleeding on the airport floor. From her hospital bed, Maya watched the momentum build. More victims came forward. More TSA agents like Jordan broke their silence about the toxic culture they'd witnessed. Documents were leaked, showing years of covered-up incidents, dismissed complaints, and protected abusers. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Patricia Hendricks, facing federal conspiracy charges and the end of her career, decided to cooperate. Her lawyer reached out to David Reeves with an offer full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She has documents, the lawyer said, not just about Bradley, but about the whole system. Direct orders from above to minimize complaints to protect officers no matter what, to prioritize the appearance of security over actual safety or civil rights. Maya was discharged from the hospital a week after the shooting, though she'd need months of physical therapy to fully recover. She returned to her Charlotte home to find it surrounded by media supporters and security provided by the Marshal Service, a protection she'd refused before, but now couldn't. Her first public appearance was at a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse, where she'd served for 15 years. She walked slowly, aided by a cane, but her voice was strong. 3 weeks ago, I was shot 3 times for the crime of existing while black in America, she began. But I was lucky. I survived. I had witnesses. I had Jordan Williams, whose courage ensured that the truth couldn't be buried. But how many others weren't lucky? How many were traumatized, humiliated, brutalized in silence? She paused, looking directly at the cameras. This isn't about me. This isn't even about Officer Bradley, who will face justice for his crimes. This is about a system that has confused security with domination, that has militarized what should be a civilian function, that has forgotten that every traveler is a human being, deserving of dignity and respect. Some have said that investigating the TSA will compromise security. I say that allowing armed bullies to operate with impunity is what compromises security. When law-abiding citizens fear those who are supposed to protect them more than any external threat, we have already lost. I am announcing today that I am taking a leave of absence from the bench to focus on this fight. Not as a judge, but as a citizen who happened to survive long enough to speak for those who didn't, who couldn't, who weren't heard. We will have accountability. We will have reform. We will have justice. The crowd erupted in applause, chants of justice for Maya filling the air. But Maya raised her hand for silence. Not justice for Maya, she corrected. Justice for all. The weeks following Maya's press conference transformed Charlotte's federal courthouse into ground zero for a national reckoning. Every morning, protesters gathered on the steps where she'd spoken their signs, demanding accountability not just for Bradley, but for an entire system that had failed them. Maya watched from her office window. She'd returned part-time against doctor's orders, unable to stay away from the work that now consumed her. "You should be resting," David Reeves said, entering with a stack of files that made Maya's desk groan under the weight. "Your physical therapist called. You missed another appointment." "I'll rest when this is over," Maya replied, though the constant ache in her shoulder suggested her body had different priorities. She opened the top file, recognizing Patricia Hendricks' handwriting immediately. "What did she give us?" "Everything," David said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Internal memos going back 8 years. Direct instructions to supervisors to protect officers at all costs. A point system. Jesus Maya, they had an actual point system for how many complaints an officer could accumulate before action was required. Bradley had 43 complaints, but only 28 points, because they weighted them based on the complainant's profile." Maya's hand stilled on the paper. Their profile. Race, economic status, whether they had legal representation. A complaint from a white business traveler was worth 3 points. A complaint from someone like you, before they knew you were a judge, 0.5 point. The systematic nature of it made Maya's stomach turn. This wasn't unconscious bias or individual prejudice. This was institutional, calculated discrimination. She thought of Carol Summers's daughter, of the hundreds of others who'd come forward, each believing their experience was isolated, personal, when in fact it was policy. "We need to depose Hendricks immediately," Maya said, "before someone decides she's too much of a liability." David hesitated. "About that, she's asking for protective custody. Says she's received death threats, but I think she's more afraid of her former colleagues than any civilian." Maya understood. Hendricks had broken the blue wall, or in this case, the TSA's institutional omerta. The woman who'd stood by while Maya bled on the airport floor was now their star witness, a irony not lost on either of them. 3 days later, Maya sat across from Patricia Hendricks in a secure conference room at the federal building. Hendricks looked like she'd aged a decade. In the past month, her severe bun had given way to unkempt gray hair. Her TSA uniform replaced with a plain suit that hung loose on her diminished frame. "Before we begin," Hendricks said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. What happened to you? Save it." Maya cut her off. "I don't need your apology. I need your testimony. Every detail, every cover-up, every order you followed that you knew was wrong." Hendricks flinched but nodded. "Where do you want me to start?" "With Bradley. When did you first know he was a problem?" "His 3rd week on the job," Hendricks admitted. "He made a teenage girl remove her hijab in public, claimed it was a security risk. Her father complained, threatened to go to the media. I was told to handle it." "By whom?" "Regional Director Marcus Stone. He said Bradley showed promise, just needed guidance. That some officers were naturally more aggressive in their approach, and that wasn't necessarily bad for security." Maya's recorder captured every word as Hendricks unraveled 5 years of systematic abuse. Bradley hadn't been an aberration, he'd been exactly what they wanted. Aggressive, intimidating, someone who made travelers afraid. Fear, Hendricks explained, was considered a deterrent. If people dreaded airport security, they'd be less likely to try anything. But it wasn't about security. Hendricks continued, her hands trembling. "I realized that eventually. It was about power, about reminding people that their rights ended the moment they entered that checkpoint. Bradley understood that implicitly. He thrived on it." "And you let him," Maya said coldly. "I followed orders," Hendricks replied, then shook her head. "No, that's the coward's answer. I enabled him. Every complaint I dismissed, every victim I silenced. I told myself I was protecting the institution. But really, I was protecting myself. My career, my pension, my position." The deposition went on for 6 hours. By the end, they had names, dates, and a paper trail that reached to the highest levels of the TSA. Director Marcus Stone, who'd protected Bradley. Regional Administrator James Powell, who'd created the point system. Even connections to Homeland Security officials who'd known about the abuses but deemed them acceptable casualties in the War on Terror. As Hendricks was led away by federal marshals, Maya felt the weight of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about getting justice for herself anymore. This was about dismantling a corrupt system that had operated with impunity for 2 decades. The news cycle, which had begun to move on from the shooting, exploded again when portions of Hendricks's testimony were leaked. Maya didn't authorize the leak, but she didn't investigate it too thoroughly either. The public had a right to know what their government had sanctioned in the name of security. Jordan Williams, who'd become an unofficial spokesman for TSA whistleblowers, appeared on Rachel Maddow's show the night the story broke. He'd traded his TSA uniform for a crisp suit funded by the multiple job offers he'd received from civil rights organizations, though he'd yet to accept any focused instead on the fight for reform. "What people need to understand," Jordan said, leaning forward earnestly, "is that officers like me who joined to genuinely help, we were pressured to stay silent. I filed 17 complaints about various incidents I witnessed. Each time I was told I was being disloyal, that I didn't understand the bigger picture. They made us complicit through silence." "But you didn't stay silent when it mattered most," Maddow pointed out. "No," Jordan agreed. "Because watching Judge Washington stand there with such dignity while Bradley tried to break her, I realized that my silence made me just as guilty as him. Every time I didn't speak up, didn't record, didn't intervene, I enabled the next abuse." Maya watched from her home, where she was supposed to be resting, but was instead surrounded by legal documents and strategy notes. Her phone rang. It was Attorney General Harrison. "Maya, we have a problem," Harrison said without preamble. "Stone and Powell have lawyered up. They're claiming qualified immunity, saying they were following established protocols approved by previous administrations. If this goes to trial, they'll try to make it about national security policy, not individual accountability." "Then we don't let it go to trial," Maya said. "We make it public. Every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence. Let them try to claim immunity when the American people see what they've been doing. That's not how the system works. The system protected Bradley until he shot a federal judge on camera," Maya interrupted. "The system is broken, Loretta. Either we fix it publicly, transparently, or we admit that justice is just a word we use to make ourselves feel better about institutional failure." There was a long pause. "You're talking about congressional hearings. I'm talking about a complete restructuring of airport security. Congressional hearings are just the beginning." The call ended with Harrison's reluctant agreement to push for public hearings. Maya knew she was asking the Attorney General to risk her political career, but some fights were worth that risk. 2 weeks later, Kevin Bradley's trial began. The federal courthouse in Charlotte was surrounded by protesters, media, and security. Maya attended every day, despite her doctor's protests about the strain on her still-healing body. She sat in the gallery, her presence a silent reminder of what Bradley had done. Bradley's defense was predictable. He felt threatened. He followed his training. He made a split-second decision in a tense situation. His attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Thomas Brennan, tried to paint Maya as aggressive, non-compliant someone who'd created the dangerous situation through her refusal to cooperate. "Judge Washington," Brennan said during cross-examination after Maya had taken the stand, "isn't it true that you refused Officer Bradley's lawful orders?" Maya's voice was steady. "I asked to wait for a female officer for an invasive search, as is my right under TSA's own policies. But when Supervisor Hendricks arrived and authorized the search, I complied," Maya said simply. "I extended my arms. I submitted to the screening. And then Officer Bradley shot me 3 times. After you assaulted him." Objection. The prosecutor, ADA Jennifer Chen, stood quickly. "There's no evidence of any assault." Sustained, the judge ruled. Brennan tried another approach. You announced you were a federal judge. Didn't you think that might be perceived as a threat, as trying to use your position to avoid security procedures? Maya looked directly at Bradley, who couldn't meet her eyes. Mr. Brennan. I identified myself in hopes that Officer Bradley would realize the gravity of his escalation. Instead, it seemed to enrage him further. As if my position, my education, my refusal to cower, was itself a crime worthy of execution. The courtroom was silent. Even Brennan seemed momentarily lost for words. But it was Jordan Williams's testimony that truly sealed Bradley's fate. He walked the jury through the entire incident, his phone's video playing on the courtroom screens. Every aggressive move Bradley made, every calm response from Maya, the moment Bradley drew his weapon on an unarmed woman with her hands raised. In your opinion, as a TSA officer, Prosecutor Chen asked, was there any justification for Officer Bradley's use of deadly force? None, Jordan said firmly. Judge Washington posed no threat. She had no weapon. She was complying with the screening. Officer Bradley shot her because he could, because he believed his badge gave him that right. The defense tried to discredit Jordan, painting him as a disgruntled employee, someone with an agenda. But Jordan remained calm, factual, his integrity shining through their attempts at character assassination. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, attempted murder assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations. Bradley's face went white as the verdict was read. He'd genuinely believed until that moment that the system would protect him as it always had. As court officers led Bradley away in shackles, he finally looked at Maya. I was doing my job, he said, his voice breaking. No, Maya replied quietly. You were doing what you'd been allowed to get away with. There's a difference. The conviction made headlines worldwide, but Maya knew it was just the beginning. One officer held accountable didn't fix a broken system. The real battle was just starting. The congressional hearings were scheduled for the following month. Maya spent every waking hour preparing, gathering evidence, coordinating with other victims who would testify. Her home had become a war room, with charts on the walls showing the connections between TSA leadership, the patterns of abuse, the systematic cover-ups. Angela visited regularly, worried about her sister's obsessive focus. Maya, you're pushing too hard. You were shot 3 times. You need to heal physically and mentally. This is my healing, Maya replied, not looking up from the deposition she was reviewing. Every document we uncover, every victim who gets to tell their story, every official who's held accountable, that's what healing looks like for me. And after? Angela asked. When the hearings are over, the reforms are passed, what then? Will you be able to let it go? Maya finally looked up at her sister. I'll never be able to go through an airport without remembering. Every security checkpoint, every uniformed officer, every metal detector. Beep, it's all connected to that morning now. But maybe if we do this right, the next person who looks like me won't have to wonder if today's the day their existence becomes a crime. The night before the hearings, Maya couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the city lights, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. The scars were still visible, her shoulder, her ribs, her thigh. Physical reminders of how quickly safety could become violence, how easily authority could become tyranny. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan Williams. Ready for tomorrow. We're going to change everything. Maya smiled slightly. This young man who'd lost his job for doing the right thing, who'd become an unlikely hero in a story that should never have needed heroes, he still believed change was possible. His optimism was infectious. She texted back, not everything, but enough to matter. The next morning, Maya dressed carefully in her best suit, the navy one that made her look judicial, even without her robes. She covered her scars, but didn't hide her cane, let them see what their system had done to her, and failed to break. The car ride to Washington was quiet. Her driver, a federal marshal assigned for her protection, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "My daughter," he said suddenly, then stopped. "Yes," Maya prompted. "She wants to be a lawyer because of you. Says you proved that power doesn't make someone right, that justice might be slow, but it comes eventually." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "Tell her that justice doesn't come on its own. It comes because people like her decide to fight for it." The Capitol building loomed ahead, its dome bright in the morning sun. Inside, the committee room was packed with media advocates and TSA officials who looked like they were attending their own funeral. Committee Chair Senator Elizabeth Warren called the hearing to order. "We are here today because the system failed. Failed Judge Maya Washington failed. The hundreds of victims who've come forward failed the American people who deserve better from their government. Today, we begin the process of accountability and reform." Maya was the first to testify. She walked to the witness table slowly but steadily, her cane clicking against the marble floor. The room fell silent as she settled into her chair, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. "Senators, I come before you not just as a victim, but as a federal judge who has spent 15 years believing in the system of justice we claim to uphold. On September 15th, that system shot me 3 times, not metaphorically but literally. Officer Kevin Bradley pulled the trigger, but the system loaded the gun." She continued for an hour, laying out not just her experience, but the pattern it represented. The institutional racism that was dressed up as security concerns. The abuse of power that was dismissed as necessary vigilance. The corruption that was protected as institutional loyalty. "We have created a monster," Maya said, her voice rising slightly. "In our fear after 9/11, in our desperate need to feel safe, we gave unlimited power to limited people. We told them that travelers' rights were secondary to security theater. We allowed them to humiliate, traumatize, and yes, even shoot American citizens with impunity. And then we acted surprised when they did exactly that." Senator John Harrison from Texas, a longtime defender of security measures, interrupted. "Judge Washington, surely you're not suggesting we dismantle airport security in this age of terrorism." "Senator," Maya replied calmly, "I'm suggesting we have security that actually makes us safer, not security that makes us submissive. Officer Bradley didn't make anyone safer by shooting me. The TSA doesn't make anyone safer by allowing bullies to traumatize teenagers, harass minorities, or abuse their authority. Real security requires competence, not cruelty." The hearing continued for 6 hours. Jordan Williams testified about the culture of silence. Patricia Hendricks, under immunity, revealed the full scope of the cover-ups. Victim after victim told their stories. A Muslim family detained for hours because their name was similar to someone on a list. An elderly woman forced to remove her colostomy bag in public. A transgender man subjected to invasive searches and mockery. Marcus Stone, the regional director who'd protected Bradley, took the fifth on every question. His silence spoke volumes. By the day's end, the committee announced they would be drafting comprehensive reform legislation. The TSA Reform Act, as it would come to be known, would include mandatory body cameras for all armed TSA officers, independent oversight of all complaints, an end to qualified immunity for civil rights violations, and complete restructuring of TSA leadership. But Maya wasn't done. That evening, she held her own press conference on the Capitol steps. "Today was a beginning, not an ending," she said to the gathered media. "Laws are only as good as their enforcement. We need every American who has been victimized, who has witnessed abuse, who has stayed silent out of fear to speak up now. This is our moment to reclaim our dignity, our rights, our humanity from those who would steal them in the name of false security." The response was immediate. #ReclaimDignity began trending. Stories poured in from across the country. The TSA, already reeling from the hearings, faced a tsunami of public accountability. A week later, Marcus Stone was arrested on federal conspiracy charges. 2 days after that, Regional Administrator James Powell resigned in disgrace. The dominoes were falling, each revelation leading to another, the corrupt network that had protected abusers finally being exposed to the light. Maya returned to Charlotte to find her courthouse steps covered in flowers, cards, and signs of support. She stood there for a long moment reading the messages from strangers who thanked her for her courage, who shared their own stories, who promised to continue the fight. David Reeves found her there. The Attorney General called. She wants to know if you'd consider leading a federal task force on security reform. Maya turned to him surprised. Leave the bench. Temporarily. A 2-year appointment to oversee the implementation of reforms to ensure they're not just words on paper, but real change. Maya looked back at the courthouse where she'd served for 15 years, then at the flowers left by people who believed justice was possible because she'd survived long enough to demand it. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, I'll do it. The announcement of Maya's appointment sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles. Here was a woman who'd been shot by federal law enforcement now being put in charge of reforming it. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Her first day at the task force offices in Washington, Maya found Jordan Williams waiting for her. I heard you might need someone who understands TSA from the inside, he said, smiling slightly. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak. You want to work for the task force? Maya asked. I want to work for change, Jordan replied, and I figure the best way to honor what happened to make sure it meant something is to help fix what's broken. Maya hired him on the spot. Together with a team of reformers, investigators, and civil rights attorneys, they began the hard work of transformation. Every policy was reviewed, every complaint reinvestigated, every officer's record examined. The resistance was fierce. The TSA union filed lawsuits claiming the reforms would endanger American travelers. Political opponents accused Maya of weakening national security. Death threats became a daily occurrence, requiring Maya to have constant protection. But she persisted. And slowly things began to change. Body cameras were distributed. New training programs emphasizing de-escalation and respect were implemented. Officers with patterns of complaints were terminated. The point system was abolished, replaced with zero tolerance for discrimination. The resistance Maya faced wasn't just institutional, it was personal, visceral, and sometimes violent. 6 months into her role leading the task force, she arrived at her Washington office to find the windows shattered, her desk covered in glass shards, and a note that read simply, "Stop, or next time we won't miss." The FBI investigation that followed revealed the threat had come from within law enforcement itself, though they couldn't identify the specific source. Maybe you should step back, Angela suggested during one of their phone calls, her voice tight with worry. You've already done so much. Let someone else carry this forward. Maya stood at her boarded-up window looking out at the Capitol dome. That's exactly what they want, for me to be afraid to step back to let them return to business as usual. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate me, just proves how necessary this work is. Jordan Williams, who'd become her closest advisor and friend through their shared trauma and purpose, knocked on her doorframe. "The Houston incident report you requested," he said, holding a thick folder. "It's worse than we thought." Maya took the folder, scanning through accounts of TSA officers at George Bush Intercontinental, who'd been running what amounted to a criminal enterprise targeting travelers they profiled as drug carriers, conducting illegal searches, and confiscating cash and valuables that never made it to evidence. The local FBI had been investigating for months, but had been stonewalled by TSA leadership who claimed national security privilege. "How many victims?" Maya asked. "At least 300 that we can document. Probably more who were too afraid to come forward or didn't know how to report it." Maya felt the familiar burn of anger that had sustained her through recovery, through the trial, through every obstacle. "We're going to Houston, tomorrow, unannounced." "Maya, that's their stronghold. The union president there has publicly called you." Jordan hesitated. "A race-baiting opportunist who's weakening America." Maya finished. "Yes, I saw his interview, which is exactly why we need to go. If we can clean up Houston, we can clean up anywhere." The next morning, their plane descended into Houston's humid embrace. Maya had brought a full team investigators, attorneys, and federal marshals for security. As they drove to the airport, Jordan briefed her on what they'd learned from whistleblowers who'd finally felt safe enough to speak. The ringleader is Supervisor Dennis Mitchell, Jordan explained. 23-year veteran connected to everyone from the mayor's office to the state legislature. He's been untouchable for years. Maya thought of Patricia Hendricks now serving her reduced sentence while testifying in ongoing cases. Mitchell was cut from the same cloth, but worse, not just enabling abuse, but actively profiting from it. Their arrival at the airport caused immediate chaos. Mitchell, a heavy-set man with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from years of unchecked power, met them at the security office with a phalanx of union representatives and lawyers. "Judge Washington," he said, his tone making the title sound like an insult. "We weren't expecting federal interference today." "It's not interference when we're investigating federal crimes," Maya replied calmly. "And you can address me as Director Washington. I'm here in my capacity as head of the Federal Security Reform Task Force." Mitchell's face reddened. "You have no authority here. This is a secure federal facility." Maya held up a warrant. "Actually, I have all the authority I need. This warrant gives us full access to all records, all security footage, and requires cooperation from all TSA personnel. You can cooperate, Mr. Mitchell, or you can be arrested for obstruction. Your choice." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Mitchell stepped aside. What followed was a systematic dismantling of his criminal enterprise. Maya's team spread through the airport, interviewing officers, reviewing records, downloading security footage that Mitchell had claimed was destroyed. By noon, they'd found the evidence: a hidden room where confiscated items were stored, before being sold, ledgers showing payoffs to local officials, and security footage of officers planting drugs on travelers who refused to hand over cash. The scale of corruption was breathtaking. Maya stood in the middle of the security checkpoint, the same kind of space where she'd been shot, and addressed the gathered TSA officers. Many looked terrified, others defiant, a few hopeful. "I know most of you are good people trying to do a difficult job," she began. "But you've been working in a system that rewarded the worst among you and punished those who spoke up. That ends today. Anyone who comes forward with information about corruption or abuse will be protected. Anyone who continues to cover it up will be prosecuted." A young officer barely out of training raised her hand tentatively. "What if we've seen things but were told it was normal, that it was just how things worked?" Maya's expression softened slightly. "Then you were victims too. The normalization of abuse is how corrupt systems sustain themselves. Come forward, tell the truth, and help us build something better." By the end of the day, 17 officers had requested whistleblower protection. Mitchell was arrested on federal racketeering charges, his empire crumbling in hours after decades of seeming invincible. The image of him being led away in handcuffs past the very checkpoint where he'd terrorized so many became another viral moment in what the media had dubbed the Washington Reformation. But success came with a price. That night, in her Houston hotel room, Maya received a call from Attorney General Harrison. "Maya, I'm getting tremendous pressure from Congress. Senator Harrison is threatening to defund the entire task force if you don't slow down. He's saying you're on a witch hunt, that you're destroying morale in federal law enforcement." "Good," Maya said simply. "The morale that let officers shoot unarmed citizens, steal from travelers, and abuse their authority should be destroyed. We're not reforming a system, Loretta. We're replacing it. You're making powerful enemies. I was shot 3 times for existing while black. I already had powerful enemies. At least now I'm giving them a reason." The conversation ended uneasily, but Maya knew Harrison would ultimately support her. The public momentum was too strong, the evidence too overwhelming. The American people had finally seen behind the curtain, and they were demanding change. Jordan knocked on her door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking exhausted. "Can't sleep either." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back on that airport floor. Not the shooting itself, but the moment after when I realized I might die without ever fighting back against the system that killed me. You fought back, Jordan said quietly. You're fighting back right now. We're fighting back, Maya corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you, without all the people brave enough to speak up. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Jordan spoke again. There's something else. Something I haven't told you. That morning, when Bradley shot you, it wasn't the first time I'd recorded him. I have dozens of videos on my personal phone incidents I documented, but never reported, because I knew nothing would happen. Maya turned to him surprised. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I was ashamed, Jordan admitted. All those people he hurt while I just recorded telling myself I was gathering evidence, when really I was just too scared to act. It took him shooting you, a federal judge, for me to finally find my courage. How many people suffered because I waited for the perfect victim? You weren't waiting for the perfect victim, Maya said gently. You were waiting for a moment when your voice would be heard. The system was designed to silence you, to make you complicit through fear. The fact that you recorded anything, that you preserved evidence despite the risk, that's courage. Is it enough, though? Even with everything we're doing, the reforms, the prosecutions, can we really change something this entrenched? Maya looked out at the Houston skyline lights twinkling in the darkness. My mother used to say that change is like erosion. Water doesn't break rock through force, but through persistence. Every drop that falls, every stream that flows, weakens the stone until one day it cracks. We're not the flood, Jordan. We're the steady rain that comes before it. The next months were a whirlwind of investigations, reforms, and battles. Maya's task force uncovered corruption in 17 major airports, leading to over 200 arrests and the complete restructuring of TSA leadership. The body camera program she'd championed revealed thousands of incidents of misconduct that had previously gone unreported. The new oversight board, staffed with civil rights attorneys and community representatives, reviewed every complaint with the seriousness it deserved. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Officers who joined TSA with genuine intentions to serve began stepping forward not as whistleblowers, but as reformers. They formed an organization called Officers for Accountability, led by a veteran agent named Maria Santos, who'd spent years documenting abuses but feeling powerless to stop them. Maya met with Santos in her Washington office, now repaired and reinforced with bulletproof glass, a constant reminder of the threats she faced. Director Washington, Santos began. I've been with TSA for 15 years. I've seen good people become bullies, bullies become criminals, and criminals become protected. But I've also seen officers who genuinely want to do right but don't know how in a system that punishes integrity. What are you proposing? Maya asked. Let us be part of the solution, not just new policies imposed from above, but cultural change from within. We know who the problems are, who the good officers are, what really happens when the cameras aren't rolling. Let us help clean house. It was a risk. Trusting the system to reform itself had failed before. But Maya recognized in Santos the same desperate need for redemption that drove Jordan, that drove herself, the need to prove that their profession, their choices could mean something positive. All right, Maya agreed. But transparency is non-negotiable. Everything you do, every meeting, every decision is documented and reviewed. The moment I see cover-up culture returning, it's over. Santos nodded firmly. Understood. We're tired of being ashamed of our badges. We want to earn the public's trust, not demand it. The partnership proved invaluable. Officers for Accountability identified problematic employees that outside investigators might have missed, revealed hidden practices that weren't officially documented, and most importantly, began changing the culture from within. New recruits were trained not just in security procedures, but in constitutional rights, de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. The warrior mentality that had dominated was slowly replaced with a guardian philosophy. Kevin Bradley's sentencing arrived on a cold January morning. Maya attended sitting in the same gallery where she'd watched his trial. He was thinner now, his swagger replaced with something hollow. As the judge read the sentence, 25 years for attempted murder of a federal official, Bradley's family wept in the gallery. Before he was led away, Bradley turned to Maya. "I'm sorry." He said the words, seeming to physically pain him. "I know it doesn't matter, doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. I became something I never intended to be." Maya studied him for a long moment. "You became what the system allowed you to become, what it encouraged you to become. Your choices were your own, Mr. Bradley, and you'll face the consequences. But the system that created you, that's what I'm truly fighting." Bradley nodded, understanding perhaps for the first time that he'd been both perpetrator and victim, though one far more than the other. As he was led away, Maya felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for all the damage done, all the lives destroyed by power without accountability. That evening she received an unexpected visitor at her hotel, Carol Summers. The woman whose daughter had been traumatized by Bradley 2 years before Maya's shooting stood at her door with a young woman Maya recognized from photos as her daughter Emily. "Judge Washington, Director Washington?" Carol corrected herself. "Emily wanted to meet you." Emily, now 19, stepped forward nervously. "I wanted to thank you, not just for getting justice, but for showing me that fighting back is possible. I dropped out of college after what Bradley did to me. I was so afraid, so ashamed. But watching you stand up even after being shot made me realize I was letting him win." "Are you back in school?" Maya asked gently. Emily nodded. "Pre-law. I want to be a civil rights attorney. I want to help people who've been hurt by those in power." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "That's the real victory. Not the sentences or the reforms, but people like you refusing to let trauma define your limits." As the Summers left, Maya stood at her window looking out at the Capitol dome lit against the dark sky. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Senator Harrison was scheduling hearings to challenge her authority. The TSA union was planning protests and death threats continued to arrive daily. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The system that had shot her was being transformed, not through violence or revolution, but through the steady, persistent pressure of truth and accountability. Every officer who chose integrity over complicity, every victim who found their voice, every policy that prioritized dignity over domination, they were all drops of water wearing away at the stone of institutional corruption. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "Houston update: 3 more officers came forward today. The new screening procedures are showing 30% fewer complaints. It's working, Maya. Slowly, but it's working." Maya smiled slightly. Change was indeed like erosion, patient, persistent, and ultimately unstoppable. The morning she'd been shot, she'd risen from that airport floor, not just as a survivor, but as a catalyst. The bullets that were meant to silence her had instead given voice to thousands who'd suffered in silence. The investigation expanded beyond TSA to encompass broader issues of law enforcement accountability. Maya's task force became a model consulted by police departments, federal agencies, and even international security organizations looking to reform their own practices. The Washington Doctrine, as legal scholars had begun calling her approach, transparency, accountability, and dignity as the foundations of security, was being studied in law schools and police academies. But with influence came opposition. Senator John Harrison, who'd challenged Maya during the congressional hearings, had become her most vocal opponent. He held press conferences denouncing her as a radical, claiming she was weakening America's security infrastructure. He pointed to a minor increase in prohibited items found at checkpoints, ignoring that this was due to better training and actual security work rather than theatrical harassment. Maya decided to confront him directly. She requested a meeting which his staff tried to refuse until she made it clear she would publicly note his unwillingness to engage. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon in his Senate office, a space designed to intimidate with its dark wood paneling and walls covered with photos of Harrison with various powerful figures. "Director Washington," Harrison said coldly, not offering his hand. "I'll be direct. You're destroying an essential security apparatus with your vendetta." "Senator," Maya replied calmly, taking a seat uninvited. "I'm reforming a corrupted system that was failing at its actual job while excelling at traumatizing innocent Americans. Shall I show you the statistics? Actual threats prevented versus complaints of abuse." The numbers might surprise you. Numbers can be manipulated, like the numbers TSA manipulated for years to hide their failures. Maya interrupted. "Or the complaints they deliberately undercounted, Senator. I have a question for you. Have you ever been subjected to enhanced screening? Ever been forced to remove medical equipment in public? Ever had an officer's hands on your body while your children watched?" Harrison's face reddened. "That's not relevant." "It's entirely relevant. You've never experienced the system you're defending. You've never felt that particular humiliation, that powerlessness. Your privilege has insulated you from the reality that millions of Americans face. This is exactly the kind of racial divisiveness." Maya laughed sharp and bitter. "Race, Senator. I have documented cases of white grandmothers strip-searched, white veterans, humiliated white children traumatized. This isn't about race, it's about power. Race just determines how quickly that power turns violent." She pulled out a tablet, swiping to a video. "This is from Dallas Airport 3 weeks ago. Your constituent Margaret Flynn, 73 years old, forced to remove her colostomy bag in public because an officer decided she looked suspicious. She voted for you, Senator. She believed you when you said TSA keeps us safe. Watch her face as she's humiliated. Tell me that's acceptable collateral damage." Harrison watched reluctantly, his jaw tightening, as the elderly woman on screen wept while officers roughly handled her medical equipment. "One incident," he began. "I have thousands." Maya cut him off. "Would you like to see them all, or would you prefer to read the testimonies? The suicide note from the teenager who killed herself after being sexually assaulted during a pat-down. The veteran who never flew again, after officers triggered his PTSD. The families separated, the dignity, destroyed the trust, shattered." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "The world is dangerous, Director Washington. Sometimes security requires competence," Maya finished. "It requires competent, Senator. Well-trained officers using actual intelligence and proper procedures, not bullies with badges, traumatizing innocents while missing actual threats. Do you know how many test weapons TSA missed last year while they were busy harassing minorities and disabled people? 67%. They missed 67% of test threats because they were too busy with security theater to do actual security work." The meeting ended without resolution, but Maya had made her point. Harrison's opposition continued publicly, but privately, his resistance began to waver. Too many of his constituents were sharing their own horror stories, thanking Maya for finally bringing accountability. The year anniversary of the shooting arrived with unexpected media attention. Every major network wanted exclusive interviews, documentaries, book deals. Maya declined them all instead, holding a press conference at Charlotte Airport at the very checkpoint where she'd been shot. The space had been transformed. Gone were the aggressive signs and militaristic atmosphere. Officers wore body cameras and name tags with pronouns. A civilian oversight representative was stationed at a desk available for immediate complaints. The screening area had been redesigned for dignity private spaces, for enhanced screening, clear explanations of rights posted in multiple languages, chairs for those who needed to sit. "A year ago, I was shot 3 times in this space." Maya began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I survived not just bullets, but a system designed to silence those who question authority. Today, this checkpoint represents what security can look like when we prioritize both safety and dignity." She paused, seeing Jordan in the crowd, now wearing a suit as the task force's deputy director. Seeing Maria Santos in her TSA uniform leading by example. Seeing Emily Summers, the young woman studying law, because trauma had become purpose. But we're not done, Maya continued. Every reformed checkpoint, every accountable officer, every protected traveler is a victory, but the war isn't over. There are still those who believe fear is more powerful than respect, that authority doesn't require accountability, that some Americans deserve fewer rights than others. To them, I say we're not going anywhere. We're not backing down. We're not returning to the shadows where abuse thrives. The crowd erupted in applause, but Maya raised her hand for silence. I want to address the officers watching those struggling with these changes. I know it's difficult. I know you feel attacked, defensive, perhaps even betrayed. But I ask you to consider, wouldn't you rather be respected than feared? Wouldn't you rather prevent actual threats than traumatize innocents? Wouldn't you rather be guardians than warriors? After the press conference, Maya walked through the checkpoint she'd been shot in. The tiles had been replaced. No trace of her blood remained, but she could still feel it the moment of impact. The shock of realization, the determination not to let this be meaningless. An officer approached her nervously. Director Washington, I'm Officer Kim. I wanted to apologize. I was here that day. I didn't stop Bradley. I didn't speak up. I've regretted it every day since. Maya studied the young woman, seeing genuine remorse. What are you doing about that regret? I'm training new recruits now. I tell them about that day, about my failure, about the cost of staying silent. I teach them that their oath is to the Constitution, not to their colleagues' worst impulses. Then you're honoring that regret, Maya said. That's all any of us can do, learn, grow, and ensure it doesn't happen again. That evening, Maya returned to her hotel room to find a package waiting. No return address, but it had passed security screening. Inside was a simple note. Thank you for making me brave enough to fly again. It was signed by dozens of names, people who'd been traumatized by the system, but were reclaiming their freedom of movement. Maya held the note for a long moment, feeling the weight of those signatures, each one representing a person who'd been broken by the system, but was slowly healing. The package also contained photographs, people at airports standing at security checkpoints, with small smiles, reclaiming spaces that had become sites of trauma. She recognized one face immediately. Carol Summers' daughter Emily, standing confidently at a checkpoint, no longer the terrified teenager Bradley had humiliated. The phone rang, interrupting her reflection. It was David Reeves, and his voice carried an urgency that immediately set Maya on edge. Maya, we have a situation. Marcus Stone, he's dead. Maya sat down slowly. The former regional director who'd protected Bradley, who'd been awaiting trial on conspiracy charges, was gone. How? Apparent suicide. Guards found him in his cell this morning. But Maya, he left a note. More of a confession, really. Names, dates, everything. It goes all the way to the Department of Homeland Security. People we haven't even looked at yet. The implications were staggering. Stone's death, while tragic, had potentially broken open the highest levels of corruption. But it also meant that powerful people would be getting desperate, dangerous. Send me everything, Maya said. And David increased security at the task force offices. If Stone named names, those people know they're exposed now. The next morning, Maya convened an emergency meeting of her senior staff. The conference room was swept for bugs, a precaution that had once seemed paranoid, but now felt necessary. Jordan Williams, Maria Santos, and 6 other key investigators gathered around the table as Maya distributed copies of Stone's confession. Jesus Christ, Santos whispered as she read. Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Richard Vaughn, personally ordered the suppression of complaints against officers who were aggressive but effective. He called it Operation Guardian Shield. Jordan looked up from his copy. They had an actual program for this. They were deliberately recruiting and protecting officers with authoritarian tendencies. Maya nodded grimly. According to Stone, They believed that fear was a more effective deterrent than actual security measures. They wanted officers who would make people afraid to even think about causing trouble. Bradley wasn't an aberration. He was exactly what they were looking for. The room fell silent as they absorbed this. Then Santos spoke up. "We need to move fast. If Vaughn knows we have this, he'll be destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses." "He's already started," Maya interrupted. 3 witnesses in our Houston case have suddenly recanted their testimonies. 2 others have disappeared entirely. We're not just fighting corruption anymore, we're fighting a cover-up in real time. Maya made a decision that would later be called either brilliant or reckless, depending on who was asked. She leaked portions of Stone's confession to the Washington Post, ensuring that the information couldn't be suppressed or buried. Within hours, the story exploded across every media platform. #Operation Guardian Shield began trending globally. The backlash was swift and vicious. Within 24 hours, Maya received a summons to appear before a closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Harrison, despite their previous confrontation, warned her privately that she was walking into an ambush. "They want to discredit you," he said during a brief phone call. "Paint you as a vigilante, someone who's compromising national security for personal revenge. Be careful, Director Washington. You're threatening people who've ended careers for less." The Senate hearing room was different from the public congressional hearings months earlier. This was closed-door classified with no media presence. The committee members sat in shadow, their faces barely visible in the deliberately dim lighting. At the center sat Senator Patricia Mitchell from Texas, a longtime ally of the security establishment. "Director Washington," Mitchell began, her tone ice cold. "You've leaked classified information to the media, compromising ongoing investigations and potentially endangering national security. Explain yourself." Maya had prepared for this. "Senator Mitchell, I released evidence of criminal conspiracy within the Department of Homeland Security. Evidence that was already being destroyed, witnesses that were being silenced. The American people have a right to know when their government is deliberately violating their civil rights." "That's not your decision to make," Mitchell snapped. "You're not elected. You're an appointed bureaucrat who's forgotten her place." "My place?" Maya let a dangerous edge enter her voice. "My place was bleeding on an airport floor after being shot by an officer your policies protected. My place was in a hospital bed while the system tried to cover up what happened. So yes, Senator, I've forgotten my place, the place where victims are supposed to stay silent and grateful." Senator James Crawford from Wyoming leaned forward. "Director Washington, are you aware that Richard Vaughn has served this country for 30 years, that he's prevented dozens of terrorist attacks? You're destroying a good man's reputation based on the confession of a criminal facing life in prison." Maya pulled out a tablet, swiping to a video file. "Would you like to see the evidence?" "Senator, not just Stone's confession, but the documents he preserved. The emails where Vaughn explicitly orders the protection of violent officers. The memos establishing quotas for aggressive interventions. The recordings of him laughing about complaints from traumatized travelers." She played one recording, Vaughn's voice filling the room. "These people need to understand that the airport isn't their living room. A little fear keeps everyone in line. If some grandmother gets roughed up, maybe she'll think twice before packing suspicious items." The committee members shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd prepared to intimidate Maya, to force her back into line. They hadn't prepared for her to have evidence that was this damning, this indefensible. But Mitchell wasn't done. "Even if these allegations are true, your methods are destroying the morale of our security apparatus. TSA officers are quitting in record numbers. Our enemies are watching us tear ourselves apart. Is your personal vendetta worth compromising American safety?" Maya stood gathering her materials. "Senator Mitchell, officers are quitting because they're being held accountable for the first time in 20 years. The ones leaving are the ones who joined for power, not service. The ones staying, the ones joining now, are people who believe in actual security, not security theater. As for our enemies, They're not learning anything from my reforms they didn't already know. The only people threatened by transparency are those who've been abusing their power in the shadows." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Senator, it's not personal. It's justice. The fact that you can't tell the difference says everything about why these reforms are necessary." Maya left the hearing, knowing she'd made powerful enemies, but also knowing she'd won the battle for public opinion. The leaked recordings of Vaughn spread like wildfire. By evening, protesters had gathered outside DHS headquarters, demanding his resignation. But Vaughn wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, Maya woke to find her own face on the news, with headlines screaming about her radical past. Someone had leaked selective portions of her judicial records cases, where she'd ruled in favor of defendants against law enforcement, painting her as anti-police, anti-security, anti-American. Jordan found her in her office, staring at the television coverage. "It's character assassination," he said quietly. "They're trying to destroy your credibility." "Let them try," Maya replied, though the attack stung more than she'd admit. "I've been a federal judge for 15 years. Every ruling I made is public record. If they want to debate my judicial philosophy, I welcome it." But the attacks became more personal. Photos appeared of Maya at law school protests 20 years earlier. Quotes were taken out of context to suggest she was a radical. Someone leaked her therapy records from after the shooting, trying to paint her as unstable, driven by trauma rather than justice. Angela called furious. "How did they get your medical records? That's illegal." "Everything about this has been illegal," Maya replied tiredly. "But legality only matters if someone enforces the law, and the people who should be enforcing it are the ones breaking it." The smear campaign might have worked except for one thing: the victims kept coming forward. For every attack on Maya's character, 3 new people shared their stories of abuse at TSA checkpoints. Parents of children who'd been traumatized, elderly people who'd been humiliated, disabled individuals who'd been treated like criminals. The human cost of the system Maya was fighting became impossible to ignore. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. A whistleblower from within DHS, someone close to Vaughn, reached out to Jordan Williams. They met in a parking garage at midnight, like something out of a political thriller. The whistleblower, a middle-aged woman who identified herself only as Catherine, handed Jordan a flash drive. "Everything's on there. Financial records, meeting recordings, the real Operation Guardian Shield files. Vaughn's been taking kickbacks from security contractors, companies that profit from the culture of fear. The more aggressive TSA became, the more equipment they needed to buy. Follow the money." Jordan brought the flash drive to Maya immediately. They spent the night going through the files, each revelation more damning than the last. Vaughn hadn't just been protecting abusive officers, he'd been profiting from them. Every escalation, every expanded authority, every piece of military-grade equipment purchased for TSA had earned him kickbacks totaling over $3 million. "This is it," Jordan said, exhausted but exhilarated. "This is what brings him down." Maya was already on the phone with the Attorney General. "Loretta, I'm sending you files that warrant immediate federal raids. Vaughn, his associates, the contractors. This is a RICO case now." The raids happened at dawn. FBI agents stormed Vaughn's home, his office, and the offices of 3 security contractors. The image of Vaughn being led away in handcuffs, still in his pajamas, became the defining moment of what the media called the Great Reckoning. But Maya knew this was bigger than just Vaughn. The corruption was systemic, cultural, embedded in the very DNA of post-9/11 security policy. At a staff meeting, she laid out her vision for what came next. "We're not just reforming TSA," she said. "We're redefining what security means in a democracy. Security isn't about making citizens afraid of their government. It's about making government accountable to its citizens." Maria Santos raised her hand. "How do we change a culture that's been building for 20 years, Most of these officers don't remember a time before this mentality. Maya had been thinking about this. We start with education. Every TSA officer, current and new, goes through a program on constitutional rights de-escalation and the history of civil rights in America. We bring in speakers, victims of abuse, yes, but also officers who've successfully prevented threats through actual intelligence work rather than intimidation. We show them what real security looks like. The program, dubbed Security with Dignity, faced massive resistance from the union and hardliners in Congress. But Maya had an unexpected ally: the airlines. They'd been losing customers for years due to the toxic atmosphere at security checkpoints. When major carriers threatened to fund their own private security unless reforms continued, political opposition began to crumble. 6 months into the reform program, Maya visited Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the busiest in the world, and once notorious for aggressive screening practices. The transformation was remarkable. Officers greeted travelers, politely explained procedures clearly, and actually seemed to be looking for threats, rather than opportunities to exert power. Maya stood in the observation area, watching a young black family go through security. The children weren't crying, the parents weren't tense, the officers were professional, but friendly. It was what air travel security should have been all along. An older officer approached her, his name tag reading Johnson. "Director Washington, I wanted to thank you. I've been with TSA for 18 years, and for the first time I'm proud of my job. My own kids used to be embarrassed to tell people what I did. Now my daughter says I'm one of the good guys." "You were always one of the good guys," Maya replied. "The system just didn't let you show it." But even as progress was made, the forces of resistance were organizing. A group calling itself Patriots for Security began running ads claiming Maya's reforms had made America vulnerable. They funded primary challenges against politicians who supported her, poured money into legal challenges to the new policies, and organized protests at airports. The leader of Patriots for Security was revealed to be Thomas Brennan, the lawyer who'd defended Kevin Bradley. He'd found a new cause, or perhaps the same cause, in a new form, protecting the powerful from accountability. At a televised debate, Brennan confronted Maya directly. "Director Washington, since your reforms began, there have been 3 attempted security breaches at major airports. Your soft approach is emboldening terrorists." Maya had expected this. "Mr. Brennan, those 3 attempts were all stopped by officers using actual investigative techniques rather than random harassment. Meanwhile, under the old system, the one you're defending, TSA, missed 67% of test weapons, which sounds more dangerous to you. You're playing politics with American lives." "No," Maya interrupted sharply. "I'm saving American lives from suicide after TSA-induced trauma from heart attacks during unnecessary stress at checkpoints from the violence that comes when we normalize authoritarian behavior. Every study shows that respect and professionalism are more effective at identifying threats than fear and intimidation. But you're not interested in effectiveness, are you? You're interested in power." The debate went viral, with public opinion polls showing overwhelming support for Maya's position. But she knew that public opinion could be fickle, that one successful attack, one security failure, could undo everything they'd built. That's why she was surprised when Jordan came to her office with an unusual request. "There's someone who wants to meet with you, Kevin Bradley." Maya's hand instinctively went to her shoulder, where the first bullet had struck. "Bradley, why?" "He says he has information about a plan to sabotage the reforms to stage an incident that would discredit everything we've done." Maya met Bradley in federal prison, the man who'd shot her now behind reinforced glass. He looked older, broken, the arrogance completely gone. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Shooter and victim separated by glass and so much more. "Why should I believe anything you say?" Maya finally asked. Bradley's voice was hoarse. "Because I've lost everything. My family, my freedom, my identity. I've had nothing to do but think about how I got here, how I became someone who could shoot an unarmed woman and feel justified. And I realize now that I was a weapon, not a person. They turned me into exactly what they wanted, someone who would pull the trigger without thinking. And now you want redemption. Maya's voice was cold. No, Bradley said quietly. I know there's no redemption for what I did. But maybe I can stop someone else from becoming what I became. There are people, Director Washington, who want you to fail so badly, they're willing to let Americans die for it. He told her about conversations he'd overheard, plans being made by former TSA officers who'd been fired during the reforms. They were planning to exploit weaknesses in the new, less aggressive screening procedures to stage an incident, not a real attack, but something that would look like one. Something that would terrify the public back into accepting authoritarian security. When? Maya asked. Christmas Eve. Maximum travel. Maximum media attention. They figure if they can make it look like your reforms failed during the busiest travel day of the year, public opinion will turn instantly. Maya left the prison with her mind racing. If Bradley was telling the truth, they had 6 weeks to prevent a staged incident that could destroy everything they'd built. But if it was a trap, if she acted on false information from the man who'd tried to kill her, she'd be playing right into her enemy's hands. She convened her inner circle that night. Jordan, Maria, David, and a few others gathered in a secure location to discuss Bradley's information. It could be a setup, David warned. Bradley has every reason to lie to you. But what if he's not lying? Jordan countered. What if we ignore this and something happens? Maria had been quiet, but now she spoke up. I know some of the fired officers he's talking about. They're angry, desperate, and they blame Director Washington for ruining their lives. I wouldn't put it past them. Maya made the decision. We investigate quietly. No official channels, nothing that could tip them off. If there's a plot, we stop it. If there's not, we've lost nothing but time. The investigation that followed was unlike anything the task force had done before. They were investigating their own former federal officers who knew all the procedures, all the weaknesses. Jordan went undercover, reaching out to discharged officers, pretending to be disillusioned with Maya's leadership. What he found was worse than they'd imagined. Not just a plan for a staged incident, but an entire network of former officers, some current sympathizers, and even some political figures who were coordinating to undermine the reforms. They called themselves the Restoration Movement. And their goal was simple: restore TSA to its former power, no matter the cost. Jordan recorded everything, building a case that revealed the depth of the conspiracy. They had weapons that could be planted, actors ready to play terrorists. Media contacts prepared to spin the story. It was elaborate, well-funded, and terrifyingly close to execution. On December 20th, 4 days before the planned incident, Maya struck. Coordinated arrests across 6 states nabbed 17 conspirators, including 2 current TSA supervisors who'd been feeding information to the group. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded conversations, financial transactions, even rehearsal videos of the planned fake attack. The revelation that former and current officers had been planning to stage a terrorist incident to discredit reforms sent shockwaves through Washington. Senator Harrison, who'd been Maya's opponent, publicly apologized and announced his support for making her reforms permanent and expanding them to other federal law enforcement agencies. Christmas Eve came and went without incident. Airports reported the smoothest holiday travel in years, with satisfaction surveys showing unprecedented approval ratings for TSA. The transformation was remarkable. An agency once synonymous with abuse and incompetence was becoming a model for accountable law enforcement. But the personal cost for Maya had been enormous. The constant threats, the political battles, the emotional toll of reliving her trauma daily while fighting for reform had left her exhausted. On New Year's Eve, she sat in her apartment, looking at the commendations and awards that had poured in, feeling oddly empty. Angela visited, finding her sister staring out the window at the celebrating crowds below. "You did it, Maya. You actually changed the system." "Did I?" Maya asked quietly. "Or did I just push it back temporarily? How long before the next Bradley, the next Vaughn, the next crisis that makes people willing to trade dignity for security? Angela sat beside her. You can't control the future, but you've given people tools to fight back examples of what accountability looks like. That matters. The phone rang. It was Jordan. Maya, turn on the news. The screen showed crowds at airports across the country, but not protesting. They were celebrating, travelers and TSA officers together, holding signs thanking Maya for the reforms. Someone had organized it, a grassroots movement of people who'd been affected by the changes, showing their support on the year anniversary of the reforms. You see, Jordan said over the phone, it's not just policy changes. You've changed hearts and minds. You've shown people that they don't have to accept abuse, that government can be held accountable, that one person standing up can make a difference. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. All the pain, the fear, the exhaustion seeing those crowds made it worthwhile. She thought of that morning in Charlotte bleeding on the airport floor, wondering if she'd survive. She had survived, and more than that, she'd transformed her survival into systematic change. The task force's mandate was coming to an end. Maya had to decide whether to return to the bench or continue the fight in a different capacity. Multiple organizations had offered her positions, civil rights groups, law schools, even a potential run for Senate. But Maya had different plans. At her final press conference as director of the Federal Security Reform Task Force, she announced the creation of the Washington Institute for Government Accountability, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating and reforming abusive government practices across all agencies. TSA was just the beginning, she said to the gathered media. Every agency that operates without accountability, every official who believes their badge puts them above the law, every system that prioritizes power over people, we're coming for all of it. The funding materialized immediately. Tech billionaires, civil rights organizations, and thousands of ordinary citizens contributed. Jordan Williams signed on as deputy director. Maria Santos left TSA to become director of law enforcement relations. Even Emily Summers, fresh out of law school, joined as a junior investigator. The Washington Institute for Government Accountability opened its doors in a renovated building just blocks from the Department of Justice, a deliberate choice that Maya explained to her team on their first day. We're not hiding in the suburbs or setting up in some anonymous office park. We're right here in the heart of federal power, a constant reminder that someone is watching. The Institute's first major case came sooner than expected. 3 weeks after opening, Maya received a call from a Border Patrol agent in Texas who'd seen what the TSA reforms had accomplished. Officer Miguel Ramirez had documented years of abuse at detention facilities, including children separated from families and held in conditions that violated basic human rights. He'd tried reporting through official channels, only to face the same wall of silence and intimidation that TSA whistleblowers had encountered. Maya flew to El Paso with Jordan and Emily, meeting Ramirez at a small diner near the border. The man was nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder, his hands shaking as he slid a thick envelope across the table. They call them ice boxes, Ramirez said quietly. Concrete cells kept at near-freezing temperatures, children sleeping on floors, no blankets, lights on 24 hours. I've seen kids as young as 3, Director Washington. 3 years old, alone and terrified, treated like criminals. Emily, who'd joined them to gain field experience, couldn't hide her horror. How long has this been happening? Years, Ramirez replied. We're told it's necessary for security, that comfort encourages more illegal crossings. But these are children. Whatever their parents did or didn't do, they're innocent children. Maya studied the photographs Ramirez had risked his career to take. They showed exactly what he'd described. Children huddled together for warmth, teenagers caring for toddlers, conditions that would be illegal in any prison, let alone a facility holding minors. Are you prepared to go public? Maya asked. Once we start this investigation, there's no going back. They'll come after you like they came after Jordan. Ramirez looked at Jordan, who'd become something of a legend among federal whistleblowers. Did you regret it? Speaking up? Every day, Jordan said honestly. I regret that I had to, that the system was so broken it required me to sacrifice my career to fix it. But I never regret doing it. The regret of staying silent would have been worse. Ramirez nodded slowly. Then yes, I'm ready. The investigation that followed revealed a pattern of abuse that made TSA's problems look minor by comparison. The Institute's investigators, many of them former federal agents who'd joined Maya's cause, uncovered a system where cruelty had become policy. Detention facilities were deliberately uncomfortable to deter immigration, with children bearing the psychological cost. But this time, Maya faced a different kind of opposition. Immigration was a more politically charged issue than airport security. Even some of her supporters from the TSA reform movement hesitated to back her now. Senator Harrison, who'd become an ally, warned her during a private meeting. Maya, immigration is a third rail. You touch this, you risk everything you've built. The Institute, the TSA reforms your reputation. It could all come crashing down. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying the senator who'd once been her enemy. James, when you have children of your own, imagine them sleeping on concrete in a freezing cell, alone and afraid. Then tell me if politics matters more than their suffering. It's not about politics. It's always about politics, Maya interrupted. Just like TSA was about the politics of security theater. We create these systems that dehumanize people, then act surprised when they produce inhumane results. I didn't survive being shot to only fight the battles that are politically convenient. The Institute released its preliminary findings in a report that dominated news cycles for weeks. The images of children in detention, verified and documented, sparked nationwide protests. But more importantly, it sparked action from an unexpected source: federal judges who'd been silently troubled by what they'd seen in immigration cases, but hadn't had the evidence to act. Judge Patricia Coleman from the Fifth Circuit reached out to Maya directly. Director Washington, I've been presiding over immigration cases for 12 years, and I've suspected these conditions existed but could never prove it. Your investigation gives us the ammunition to demand change through judicial orders. A series of emergency injunctions followed, ordering immediate improvements to detention conditions. The Department of Homeland Security, still reeling from the Vaughn scandal, found itself under siege from multiple directions. But the real victory came when several Border Patrol agents, inspired by Ramirez's courage, formed their own reform group, similar to Maria Santos's Officers for Accountability. One evening, as Maya reviewed testimonies from detained children, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but she answered anyway. Director Washington. The voice was elderly formal. This is former President William Crawford. Maya straightened in her chair. Crawford had been president during the expansion of security measures post 9/11, the architect of many policies she was now dismantling. Mr. President, she said carefully, I'm calling to tell you something I should have said publicly, but am too much of a coward to do so. Crawford said, his voice heavy. We were wrong. After 9/11, we were so afraid, so angry, that we built systems designed to punish rather than protect. We convinced ourselves that safety required sacrifice of principles, that fear was strength. Watching you dismantle these systems, seeing what they'd become, it's shown me the monster we created. Maya was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected confession. Why tell me this privately? Your public support could change everything. Because I'm 83 years old. Director Washington, and I'm tired of fighting. But you're not. You have the energy and moral clarity to fix what my generation broke. I'm calling to tell you not to stop, no matter the pressure, no matter the cost. History will vindicate you even if the present doesn't. The call ended, leaving Maya shaken. Even the architects of the system knew it was wrong, but institutional inertia and political cowardice had prevented reform. She thought of Bradley, a weapon shaped by that system, and felt an unexpected moment of pity. How many Kevin Bradleys had they created? How many more were still out there waiting for their moment to exercise the cruelty they'd been taught was strength? The answer came sooner than expected. 3 months into the immigration investigation, Maya received word that an ICE officer in Arizona had shot an unarmed migrant father in front of his children, claiming he'd felt threatened despite video evidence showing the man had been complying with orders. The parallels to her own shooting were unmistakable. Maya flew to Phoenix, immediately arriving at the hospital where Carlos Mendoza was fighting for his life. Unlike Maya, he hadn't been lucky. One bullet had punctured a lung, another had nicked his spine. The doctors were uncertain if he'd walk again. In the waiting room, she found Mendoza's wife Rosa surrounded by their 3 children. The youngest, barely 5, was asking when Papa would come home. "Mrs. Mendoza," Maya said softly in Spanish. "I'm Maya Washington. I want to help." Rosa looked up, recognition dawning. "You're the judge who was shot, the one who fought back." "Yes," Maya said. "And now I want to fight for your family." The case became a rallying point for the Institute's expansion beyond TSA reform. The officer who shot Mendoza, Thomas Pike, had a history similar to Bradley's multiple complaints, all dismissed a pattern of escalation, ignored by supervisors who valued aggressive enforcement over human dignity. But this time, Maya had infrastructure in place. The Institute's legal team, led by Emily Summers, who'd graduated law school with honors, and joined full-time, filed immediate federal charges. The investigation team, coordinated by Jordan, had documented evidence preserved before it could disappear. The media strategy, refined through months of practice, ensured the story couldn't be buried. Pike's trial became a national spectacle, but more importantly, it became a teaching moment. Maya used every interview, every press conference to connect the dots between TSA abuse, immigration detention, cruelty, and police violence. They were all symptoms of the same disease, unchecked power, justified by fear. "We keep creating these separate categories," she said during a particularly powerful CNN interview. Airport security, border security, street policing, as if they're different issues. But they're all the same question. How much cruelty are we willing to accept in the name of safety? And the answer should be none. 0. Safety and dignity are not mutually exclusive. The interview went viral, but it also drew fire from a new source. The National Police Union, seeing the direction of Maya's work, launched a preemptive campaign against her. They called her anti-law enforcement, a threat to every officer in America, someone whose agenda would leave the country defenseless. The union's president, Frank Morrison, challenged Maya to a debate, thinking he could expose her as an extremist. Maya accepted immediately, knowing this was an opportunity to reach law enforcement officers who might be sympathetic to reform but were afraid to speak up. The debate, held at the National Press Club and broadcast live, became one of the most watched political events of the year. Morrison came out swinging, accusing Maya of having a vendetta against law enforcement. "Director Washington wants to neuter our police, make them afraid to do their jobs," Morrison declared. "Every officer in America is one Maya Washington investigation away from losing their career." Maya remained calm. "Mr. Morrison, I want to make officers afraid to shoot unarmed citizens, afraid to abuse their authority, afraid to violate civil rights. If that makes them afraid to do their jobs, then we need to ask what they think their job is." "Their job is to protect." "Then why do so many citizens feel more threatened by police than protected by them?" Maya interrupted. "Why do parents have to teach their children to fear the very people supposed to keep them safe?" "Mr. Morrison, I'm not anti-law enforcement. I'm pro-law, and the law says that badges don't grant extra rights, they grant extra responsibilities." Morrison tried another approach. "You've never worn a badge. You've never faced the dangers officers face daily." "No," Maya agreed. "I've only been shot by someone who did wear a badge, 3 times, while unarmed, while complying. So forgive me if I don't accept that wearing a badge automatically makes someone heroic or trustworthy." The debate shifted when Maya presented statistics the Institute had compiled. "Mr. Morrison, do you know what the #1 predictor of police violence is? It's not crime rates. It's not community demographics. It's not even funding levels. It's the absence of accountability. Departments with strong oversight have fewer incidents, fewer complaints, and this is important, fewer officer injuries. Accountability protects everyone, including good officers. Morrison struggled to respond, falling back on talking points about dangerous criminals and split-second decisions. But Maya had an answer for everything, backed by data testimonies and her own powerful story. The moment that defined the debate came when Morrison, frustrated, made a critical error. Maybe if you hadn't been so confrontational at that checkpoint, Director Washington, none of this would have happened. The audience gasped. Maya stood silent for a long moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," she finally said quietly. "You just demonstrated exactly the mindset we're fighting. You just blamed me for being shot. You suggested that exercising my rights was confrontational, that expecting to be treated with dignity was provocative. That's the culture that needs to change the idea that citizens must submit completely or deserve whatever violence they receive." Morrison tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. His own words had validated everything Maya had been saying about police culture. The debate ended with Maya making a direct appeal to law enforcement officers watching. "I know many of you joined to serve and protect. I know you're tired of being associated with the worst among you. I know you want to be trusted, respected, valued by your communities. Join us. Help us reform these systems from within. Be the officers your communities need, not the warriors they fear." The response was immediate and surprising. Within days, the Institute received messages from hundreds of officers across the country expressing support and sharing their own struggles with departmental culture. A group calling themselves Cops for Constitutional Policing formed, explicitly supporting Maya's reform agenda. But success brought new dangers. The threats against Maya escalated beyond angry letters and phone calls. The FBI uncovered a serious assassination plot by a white supremacist group that saw her as a threat to their vision of America. Maya's security had to be increased again. Her movements restricted her life, increasingly isolated despite her public prominence. It was during this period of heightened threat that Maya received an unexpected visitor. Kevin Bradley's ex-wife, Sandra, requested a meeting. Maya agreed, curious about what the woman who'd been married to her shooter could want. Sandra Bradley was nothing like Maya had imagined. She was soft-spoken, clearly nervous, clutching a worn folder. "I wanted to apologize," Sandra began. "Not for Kevin, his actions are his own, but for not speaking up sooner, for not warning anyone about what he was becoming." She opened the folder, revealing years of documentation, photos of bruises, police reports from domestic violence, calls, diary entries, detailing Kevin's escalating rage and paranoia. "I tried to report him to TSA," Sandra continued. "I told them he was violent at home, that he was dangerous. They said personal matters didn't affect professional performance. They said unless he did something at work, they couldn't act." Maya studied the documents, seeing a pattern she'd encountered too many times. Warning signs, ignored violence, dismissed as private matters, institutions protecting their own, until tragedy became unavoidable. "Why didn't you come forward during his trial?" Maya asked. "His lawyer threatened me," Sandra admitted. "Said if I testified about the abuse he'd seek full custody of our children. I was a coward. I chose my kids' immediate safety over justice." Maya reached across the desk, taking Sandra's hand. "You're not a coward. You're a survivor who did what you had to do. But I need to ask, are you willing to speak publicly now? Your story could help change how we evaluate officers, how we connect personal violence to professional risk." Sandra nodded, tears streaming. "I've watched what you've done, Director Washington, how you turned your trauma into change. I want to do the same. I want Kevin's violence to mean something to prevent the next tragedy." The Institute released Sandra's story as part of a comprehensive report on the connection between domestic violence and abuse of professional authority. The data was stunning. Officers with domestic violence histories were 5 times more likely to be involved in excessive force incidents. Yet most departments didn't even check for domestic violence during hiring or reviews. The report sparked another round of reforms, this time focusing on hiring practices and ongoing psychological evaluations for armed federal officers. But it also sparked backlash from those who saw Maya as attacking the very foundation of American law enforcement. The confrontation came to a head at a congressional hearing where Maya was called to testify about the Institute's expanding mission. The committee was split, with supporters praising her work and opponents accusing her of undermining national security and public safety. Representative Thomas Burke from Alabama led the attack. Director Washington, you've built a career on one incident, turning your personal trauma into a crusade against law enforcement. How is that objective? How is that fair? Maya had prepared for this. Representative Burke, I've built a career on 15 years of judicial service, followed by systematic documentation of widespread abuse. My shooting wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of institutional failure. And yes, I take it personally when government agents shoot unarmed citizens. Every American should take that personally. But you're creating a climate where officers are afraid to act. Good, Maya interrupted. They should be afraid to act violently. They should think twice before drawing a weapon. They should consider consequences before abusing authority. That's not weakness. Congressman, that's responsibility. Burke tried another angle. The crime rates in cities that have adopted your reforms have decreased. Maya finished for him. Crime has gone down in every city that's implemented accountability measures. It turns out that when communities trust law enforcement, they cooperate with investigations. When officers focus on actual threats instead of harassment, they prevent more crimes. Your narrative of reform leading to chaos is simply not supported by data. The hearing continued for hours, with Maya systematically dismantling every argument against reform. But the most powerful moment came when she introduced surprise witnesses, law enforcement officers, who'd implemented her recommendations and seen positive results. Chief Patricia Murphy from Seattle testified about how accountability measures had reduced both civilian complaints and officer injuries. Director Washington's reforms didn't make my job harder, she said. They made it clearer. My officers know exactly what's expected, what's acceptable, what's not. The ambiguity that led to abuse is gone. Officer David Chen from Portland talked about how de-escalation training had changed his approach. I've been a cop for 20 years. The first 15 I was taught to dominate every situation. The last 5, after implementing these reforms, I've learned to actually serve and protect. I've never felt more like a real police officer than I do now. The testimony from reformed officers was powerful, but Maya knew the real test would come from the public. The Institute had commissioned a comprehensive survey of public attitudes toward law enforcement in reformed versus unreformed jurisdictions. The results were striking trust. In law enforcement was 40% higher in areas with accountability measures. Cooperation with investigations was up 60%, and most surprisingly, officer job satisfaction had increased by 35%. This isn't about being anti-police, Maya said in her closing statement. It's about being pro-justice. Good officers want accountability because it protects them from being associated with bad actors. Communities want accountability because it ensures their rights are respected. The only people who oppose accountability are those who benefit from its absence. As the hearing concluded, Maya felt a shift in the atmosphere. Even some of the hostile committee members seemed thoughtful rather than combative. Change was happening slowly, but inevitably. That evening, back at the Institute, Maya found her team celebrating. They'd just received word that the Department of Justice was adopting their accountability framework as the national standard for all federal law enforcement. It was a massive victory, the culmination of years of work. But Maya couldn't fully celebrate. She stood at her window looking out at the city, thinking about all the people who'd been hurt by the systems they were only now beginning to reform. Carlos Mendoza was still in rehabilitation, learning to walk again. The children from the detention facilities were in therapy dealing with trauma that would last lifetimes. And somewhere, there were probably new Kevin Bradleys being created by systems that hadn't yet been reached. Jordan joined her at the window. "You're thinking about everyone we couldn't help." "How did you know?" "Because I think about them too. Every day. The people who were abused before we started recording, before we spoke up. But Maya, we can't save the past. We can only prevent the future from repeating it." Emily approached with a tablet showing breaking news. "You need to see this. President Martinez just announced she's creating a permanent federal oversight board for all law enforcement agencies. She's naming it the Washington Commission, and she wants you to chair it." Maya stared at the screen, overwhelmed. From bleeding on an airport floor to being offered the chance to permanently reshape American law enforcement, the journey felt surreal. "It would mean leaving the Institute," she said quietly. "The Institute will continue," Jordan said firmly. "We've built something that doesn't depend on any one person, even you. But this commission, this is the chance to make everything we've fought for permanent, institutional, unchangeable." Maya thought about the morning she'd been shot, how she'd forced herself to stay conscious, to speak clearly, to ensure there would be accountability. She'd survived for this moment, for the chance to ensure no one else would face what she'd faced. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." The announcement of Maya's appointment to chair the Washington Commission sent ripples through every level of law enforcement. Some celebrated, seeing it as long overdue reform. Others raged, viewing it as capitulation to anti-police sentiment. But most importantly, it sent a message to every officer in America: accountability was no longer optional.